All right, thank you. All right, everyone, well, welcome to the October meeting of the Environmental Quality Board, or EQB. My name is Nancy Daubenberger, and I am the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Transportation and honored to serve as Chair of the Environmental Quality Board. And to begin with, why don't we go ahead and call the roll, Executive Director Nuschler.
All right, thank you, Chair. I don't believe Commissioner Arnold can join us. We have Assistant Commissioner Sydney Lieb with us in the room, or she will be.
I'm here.
You're here. There you are. All right. Board Member Bakken.
Present.
Board Member Bauer-Kemper.
Here, thanks.
Board Member Brands.
My digital spirit is with you.
Commissioner Cunningham, I believe, could not join us. Do we have Assistant Commissioner Kunis? Myra, are you on the? Chair Daubenberger here. Commissioner Gronville.
Present.
Board Member Hintz, don't believe we're expecting. Chair Holman, not expecting. Board Member Katzenberger.
Here.
I don't believe we're expecting Commissioner Kessler. Do I see Deputy Commissioner Tester? Yes.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks.
Board Member Martin.
Here.
Checking, I don't believe we're expecting, but Commissioner Verlick. Board Member Nelson.
Here.
Commissioner Peterson. Didn't believe we're expecting him either. Board Member.
Yes.
Okay, because Steve's
Yeah.
here. Thank you, Steve. Sorry. Should look up from my paper and see you there. Board Member Smith. All right, and Commissioner Stroman.
I'm here, and I just want to note that Commissioner Verlick is here, but he has not been admitted to the meeting, so cannot speak.
Okay. We'll work on that. Thank you, Commissioner Stroman. And then we have Member Peter Lindstrom. Thank you. All right, so with that, Chair, we have 10 voting members today, and a quorum is 9.
Great, so we have a quorum. So with that, then the next agenda item is approval of the consent agenda. And that is the meeting minutes from the September 17th, 2025 EQB meeting. That's packet page 5. And the preliminary agenda for today's October 15th, 2025 EQB meeting. That's packet page 3. So with that, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Member Katzenberger, so moved.
Is there a second on that motion?
Second, Nelson.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Great. Well, with that, Executive Director Nuschler, would you please take the roll on the consent agenda?
Yes, I will. And just a note, I'm sorry, I'm going to throw one more tech reminder in here that the microphones are very sensitive. So if you're in the audience having side conversations, people out in the world might hear you. Just be warned. All right, so roll on the consent agenda. Commissioner Arnold is not present. Board Member Bakken.
Yes.
Board Member Bauer-Kemper.
Yes.
Board Member Brands. Board Member Brands. All right, Commissioner Cunningham is not with us. Chair Daubenberger.
Yes.
Chair Commissioner Ronball.
Yes.
Board Member Hintz is not with us. Chair Holman is not with us. Board Member Katzenberger.
Yes.
Commissioner Kessler is not with us. Board Member Martin.
Yes.
Commissioner Verlick.
Unmuted and yes.
Excellent. Sorry for the technology issues. Board Member Nelson.
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson. Not with us. Board Member Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Stroman.
Aye.
The circle back for Board Member Brands. If you want to vote on the consent agenda. Still 10, so.
The motion carries and the minutes in the agenda are adopted. And so now I will turn it back to Executive Director Nuschler for the Executive Director's report.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today and for being in person, and especially for being here as we've realized that MEA weekend has crept into Wednesday. And so you might be here while your kids are off school or doing something. So thank you for coming. Logistics, again, the meeting is being recorded. If you're online, the meeting chat is open and it's visible to everybody, but we don't keep it as part of the meeting records. So please just use it for logistical issues if you can't hear, or if something like that is going on during the meeting. And again, the microphone's very sensitive and we're still getting used to the new technology. So board members, the presenters today will welcome your questions and your feedback. If you're online, feel free to use the raise hand function or jump in. Board members, you should be able to mute and unmute yourself. It is helpful if you have your camera on while speaking. Members of the public, thank you all of you that are here. We are focusing our opportunity to give comments today on our informational agenda item related to data centers. We'll talk more about this when we get to that agenda item. Just logistics for the moment, that if you are online, please raise your hand in Teams and we'll add your name to the list of commenters. If you're in the room, there is a sign-up sheet to indicate that you would like to make a comment. So please sign up if you are here. We will cue you when we get to that point in the agenda. If you're here, we'll probably have you come up and join us at the front. If you're online, we will notify you when you can unmute and speak. There might be a slight lag when that happens before you can unmute yourself if you're online. So the instructions were just there on the screen, and they're also in the first pages of the meeting packet, which is also on our website, and you should have available to you. So really, again, a reminder for our public comment that what we really want to focus on is giving input to the board on the information they're receiving. And if you have a question, it's likely to be something that we'll need to follow up with you, unless it's something very, very simple. All right, moving on then to the director's report. Last month, we talked about the energy infrastructure rule and our rules to conform with the statutory changes. The notice of intent to adopt, also known as the proposed related to environmental review and energy projects, was published in the State Register on October 6th. It was like Colleen's last day. She got it published. She said, thanks, everybody. Go. Comments can be submitted to the Court of Administrative Hearings on their website through November 14th. All of the information about that rule is on our website under Environmental Review Rules and Regulations. And if folks have questions, Kayla Walsh is taking over kind of the communication and the finishing up of that role from Colleen. On sort of an engagement topic, Rebecca and a bunch of her collaborators kicked off our series of pollinator related webinars on October 2nd with a topic about fall and pollinators. We had over 250 people register from around the state to learn about why fall is critical for the survival of pollinators and the steps that can be taken. It is now the most popular video on our YouTube channel. And so people are learning how to help pollinators overwinter from that. So we had a lot of guest speakers and really appreciate all those folks who were able to help us and join it. And it is available to watch from our website. We're also working to do more engagement about our climate calculator tool and what that's doing. Steph is traveling and she will be presenting a poster at the Midwest Climate Resilience Conference in Wisconsin next week. And then I believe she's also been accepted to present at the annual Conference on the Environment by the Air and Waste Management Association in early November. So also getting out there to talk to folks about how the calculator works, what it does, and how it can help people do their climate calculations for their environmental review. So that's some of the stuff that we have had going on outside of some of the stuff we'll be talking about here later today. So that's it, Matt.
Right. Thank you, Director Nuschler. Are there any questions from board members on the Executive Director's report? Not seeing or hearing anything. So then we will go to the first main item on our agenda, and that is the annual update on the sustainability of state government, which is required by executive order. And our presenter is Marcus Grubbs. Is this where you want him to sit, or is it right over there?
No, I think right over there. I think we should have the camera fixed to give you a good shot from right there.
So right there, as per usual. Very good. Thank you, Marcus. And he's the Director of Office of Enterprise Sustainability in the Department of Administration. Welcome, Marcus. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Daubenberger. Commissioners, board members, this is our annual update on the work of state government towards some shared sustainability goals. And so we're going to be talking about calendar year 24, which was a long time ago now. So it'll be, we'll be reaching back, but hopefully I'll try to pull out a few examples and we'll show some examples of the work that's happening. A little bit of a grounding. It's got battery. Next slide. All right. Okay, so this is just a reminder of our governance model, and I should credit my team for the work on slides. They do such good work, and they have all this material prepared all the time, and I'm able to pull it together and bring it to places and share. So the enterprise sustainability governance model is really set at the vision is set by the governor and lieutenant governor. Lieutenant governor chairs our steering team. Many of you are also on our steering team, and we appreciate your support. And then I like to say that we kind of work as a hub, the Office of Enterprise Sustainability, to make sure communications are flowing and technical assistance is being provided, and we're sharing best practices. And so we really emphasize through the use of these work groups to share best practices amongst agencies. People often find that they're going to learn the most from people that are in similar situations, and so it's really helpful. And then each agency has a sustainability coordinator, and those sustainability coordinators do the kind of primary interfacing with us all around the work. And then what this really should be inverted, this graphic, which is to say that it's the agency team members doing the work, and we have to lift them up because we might have a great idea, or we might be able to say, hey, you can look at this, but the work of implementing and the details and getting administrative policies and procedures established and breaking down barriers with behavior is really all done at the team member level. And so we're grateful for that. Next. All right, this is a reminder of our 6 goals. So we updated these in 2023. We have 6 goals that state agencies broadly work towards, and this is around reducing fossil fuel use in the fleet, reducing the energy use per square foot in our operations. We calculate the greenhouse gas emissions, and we have tied our goal to the Next Gen Energy Act. So we're working towards a 50% reduction by 2030 at this point. Reducing water use intensity, so water use per square foot, and then increasing our diversion of solid waste. And implied here is not explicitly stated, but reducing our solid waste where we can. And then procurement, which I'll talk about here a little bit later. Next slide. So what's our role? We manage this reporting with the agency partners, and it's a lot of work. The last time I looked, there was 10,000 meters that are reported on for utilities, and that's an incredible amount. I suspect we are the largest real estate owner in the state, and so that kind of goes along with it. It's a really big lift. So we help facilitate this reporting. We provide some high-level planning, really to identify barriers and where we can to knock them down, or high-level opportunities, whether they're legislative or administrative. And then we help support implementation of projects. Some projects, for example, in partnership with another division at admin, real estate construction. And then we also champion the discussion, obviously, sharing best practices, like sharing them out there. We also support local units of government if they come and ask us for help. So we can share the same information and provide technical assistance to local units of government. And we do that more and more. And that it's really important, I think, the visibility of the work and what you see on sustainability.mn.gov, the visibility of it is saying we're here, we're doing these cost-effective things to advance sustainability in state government. And that's a really important thing. And our local units of government are attracted to that. Next, please. All right, next. Here we go. So this is what our homepage looks like. We display the cost avoided, which is a calculation of avoided due to energy savings, and then annual avoided emissions. And so next slide. You're able to then dig down further, and I'm looking at, let's see what my eyes are looking at right now. I think I'm looking at fossil fuel use. And so you can see we've kind of plateaued. We reduced our fossil fuel use in the COVID years, and we've kind of plateaued at a level of fossil fuel use. And we'll talk more about how we're planning on a big push to bring that down in the next coming years, but we're about halfway towards our goal. And what's important about this, I should say, is, we have a lot of services that are very important to people that are included here, including Metro Transit services, Metro Mobility, the regular bus service, and also MnDOT's plows. And so we can't always dictate how this turns out. Sometimes it's just a heavy snow year, and that can swing the use by 1 million gallons. And that's just a reality of providing a safe transportation system. So next slide, please. I'm looking at, sorry, I should get glasses. My wife keeps saying it. Energy. All right, so we have made a consistent downward push on our energy intensity, and this is really important. There are long-term policies at the state, SB 2030, which is to build better, increasingly better buildings. And you can see it's been a long, slow push, but when we build a new building or remodel a building significantly, it's getting brought up to a standard that exceeds code. And that is really important. And it's slowly bringing us towards our target. And I think that's hugely important. One note I would say is there's also, this is not weather normalized. So there's some weather in here. The variability on a year to year could be looking at weather, but what's important is it is a long-term downward trajectory on this. So next, please. I think I'm looking at water. And so the water is another piece that's highly weather dependent. We can talk more about it. I think we've made progress on water, and the big opportunities in water are really they're around irrigation, consumption of water use, and then we've got some pilot projects that'll be rolling out around that. But we are making progress towards it. So one thing that I'll say about water is when you look at this, it's highly dependent on washing hands and using facilities. That some of that dip that you see related to some of the COVID years really early on. But that returned as people started to return to normal operations right after COVID. So next, please. Solid waste. So we're working towards the goal line here. And the other ones, we were working down towards the goal line. Now we're working up towards the goal line, which is that we're looking for a solid waste diversion rate of 75%. This is really, really difficult work, particularly in greater Minnesota. One of our best opportunities, you can see the organics on here. The blue is recycling, and then the next color is organics. One of the biggest opportunities that we've had and that we continue to have is, well, one, the Capitol complexes and many of the facilities in the metro area. But two, our facilities with 24-hour populations produce a lot of waste. They also make a lot of food, and the first and best option to help reduce that is to look at back of the house food waste. It's like that agencies have been able to tackle, corrections, DCT, and others, and Veterans Affairs, to really start managing that waste. And it's something that helps attribute to this really kind of high level of organics diversion. Next. Okay, so greenhouse gas emissions. This one, we had a goal. We were targeting 30%. We achieved 30%, 50% goal. This is largely attributed to the greening of the electricity grid. And so if you break this down on our website, you can see even further. It'll go into by source, and you can see that electricity GHG emissions is slowly marching down. We project meeting this goal for 2030 as well. So really a big win for society overall. And you can see it at an individual facility basis as well, special for the impact of the grid, but also where projects have been completed to reduce emissions. So next slide, please. All right, this one, procurement, gets a little bit technical, so bear with me. So we're talking here about what's called acquisition spend. And so that's goods and some services, but mostly goods that state government is purchasing. And we talk about, in this goal, we talk about what are kind of enterprise-wide contracts, statewide contracts. They're usually like it's a catalog or a vendor provides numerous things on contract to us, and we go to the contract, ask for a quote, and we purchase it. There might be multiple vendors on those contract releases, but this goal really looks at, so every time we see a contract come up and it's 7 months out, there's a team of folks at admin and PCA who will take a look at those contracts and say, yes or no, there are pertinent environmental standards that apply to products on this contract. And then they'll go talk to the users of the contract and they'll say, okay, what do you think this would look like? Would it compromise your ability to use the contract to push these environmental standards? They'll talk to the vendors and say, could you provide us this? Because we're not looking to lose vendors. We're also trying to balance this with our goal of procuring from targeted group vendors. But what this process does is now every time the goal is that 50% of them we're touching. But the idea is that when somebody at the state or a cooperative purchasing venture member, of which there's 3,000 around the country, uses the contract, they're just going to get a preferable product. And there's more information about what these standards are on our website, but it also becomes a roadmap for other states to look at. This is the second iteration of this goal. We started with a goal that just had a selection of contracts that we were interested in, and all that work got done, and thanks to the PCA and Office of State Procurement. And so we've moved on to the second iteration. I think it's going really well. It's really exciting. I know that it maybe doesn't seem exciting, procurement, but it really is. This probably touches more people than anything else we do, I would think. So next. Okay, so in 25, we're going to be rolling out a couple new action plans. Next slide. The one is going to be leading the way. This was in 25. That's this year right now. Sorry, we're in 25. Leading the way to reduce energy intensity and better measure and manage solid waste. And so this year we're really focused on energy and waste. Next year, if you go to the next slide. Oh, and here's what we're doing to do it. So we have a whole bunch of tools we're providing to agencies. One is an assessment, a workbook that helps them calculate their suitability for solar. We are embarking on refrigerant counting, which is not part of our current boundary, but it's something that will in the coming years be included in the boundaries of our accounting. We've created a green lab user group, and this is actually the users of the labs in the state created this group. They said they wanted it, and we just are helping to facilitate it and point them towards some training. So that's really exciting. We're providing tuition for state agency employees to go to the building operators course. And we are also encouraging state agencies that have a large footprint to have an energy manager or someone who's similarly qualified. So that's, all really going well. Next slide. In solid waste, we've been working on, long story short, we've been doing a lot of solid waste sorts at sites. And so actually digging in and looking at their waste and saying, this is what the ideal outcome is, this is what the current outcome is, and what's the intervention at this site. We got a number of tools to do that. So physically on site, we also have an assessment workbook for them to assess the highest producing sites and what the next step might be, and so on. And then we've also launched a new solid waste lead training that we've done one portion of, and we've got a second phase here coming up. So a lot of really great work. And state agencies have been super engaged in waste. Really exciting. They love it. So, all right, next step. All right, so next year, we're going to be working on, next slide, we're going to be working on procurement and fleet. We produce these enterprise-wide action plans, and they're kind of guiding documents of how an agency could approach something. So we say, here are some things that would get you towards the goal. Next slide. So this one is we are focusing on accelerating change in the fleet. And I recognize that we've done a lot of great work in the fleet already, and now we're just going to accelerate. And then sustainable purchasing as a standard. So we're going to continue to increase the volume of contracts we look at and get educational materials out to buyers. Buyers, there's many of them in the enterprise. It's a kind of a high turnover position because they move up into other roles. And so we have to continually focus on education there. So that's really great work. Next slide. Okay, this is the best part. Sustainability awards in 24. I'm going to go fast. Next slide. All right, in the area of fleet, this is the Minnesota DNR. They launched a pilot where they are using F-150 Lightnings in their parks. It reduces noise. They can use them for patrols. It serves a lot of really great purposes. But they are going to be pursuing 8 additional vehicles. Next slide. In the area of energy, Department of Military Affairs. So you would know this is the Minnesota Army National Guard, most of you. And so this is, they recently completed a project at Laverne. The Laverne Readiness Center includes solar and a ground source heat pump, and then a new readiness center at Moorhead that also includes solar. Next slide. Department of Corrections, they've done like 4 energy efficiency loans with us now, which is great. But one of them was for lighting and washing machines, which sounds wild, but we replaced a bunch of washing machines with Speed Queens, which, as you probably all know, are super durable and last a long time. And these washing machines also save water, so it's projected to save 1.1 million gallons of water, and the energy efficiency improvement pays for the improvement in itself. Next slide. Solid waste. This one went to military affairs this last year, and they actually did a program where they challenged their soldiers to better sort and manage their waste on site, and they did a bunch of stuff to intervene in it, and they were actually able to reduce their tipping costs for waste, if you know what that is, by improving their recycling and organics outcomes. Next slide. Procurement. This one is for the Department of Health. They've pooled office supplies together and share it, reduces the waste and ordering of office supplies. And then next slide is our all-star or greenhouse gas emission. This went to a bunch of agencies who work together to file, and Met Council should be on here by themselves, but we all work together to file for elective pay tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 for the calendar year of 23. We did with these agencies, Met Council did. Min-State did as well, the University of Minnesota, all of the big entities took care of this. So next slide. And then the All-Star, which is an award that's focused on developing culture of sustainability in their agency, went to Veterans Affairs, and they've listed a bunch of really great projects, but the key is like they're engaging their staff are very engaged, and their residents in the sustainability work and really shifting the culture, which is really phenomenal. So. And next slide, I think that's it, actually. That's it. Okay. Any questions?
Thank you, Marcus. Yeah, any questions from board members?
I have a comment rather than a question, but I want to say thank you to Marcus for your work. And it's been, as commissioners, just been amazing to see the progress that all state employees and also, you know, by extension, vendors, members of our community, all as individuals, but also as teams, and then also as leaders, how we all can do something to basically build resilience, reduce greenhouse gases, reduce pollution, create a better climate, and of course, most importantly, reduce costs, or as equally as importantly, reduce costs. So it's just really incredible, the work, and we can't do this alone. We do that with each of your agencies and organizations. So it's the collaborative partnership is really powerful and amazing. So I'm always looking for what's our next challenge. Great work, you and all of us, our partners.
And if I might also add to that, is that when we started the awards, like it was like really difficult to get award submissions, for example, right? Like no bandwidth to do projects. They don't want to share stuff. We get over 20 applications a year now when we do this. It feels like we're about to bend the curve. right? Like it's starting to show up and it'll really start showing up in the data. So.
Thank you for your leadership in this space, Marcus. And I will echo what Commissioner Gronball said. And it is great to be a part of the sustainability subcabinet. Is that what it's called?
We're not a
Subcabinet, not a
Steering
subcabinet.
team.
Steering
Steering
team.
team, I
Thank
know.
you. Yes, I'm sorry. Where we do talk about these and check in, and among us agencies have shared successes and challenges, of course, and brainstormed as a group too. So it's great to be a part of that. And again, thank you for your leadership and thank you for your presentation today. And last call on. Okay, go ahead. Go
Take
ahead.
it away then.
I just had one, you mentioned lead waste management. I wonder if that was LEAD or LEED, lead. And it may be, I was just wondering if it's affiliated with US Green Building.
I'd say, I don't remember lead, but no.
That answers my question. It
Yeah.
was LEAD. That's what I
Yeah,
was,
yeah, okay.
thanks.
Peter.
Yeah, I'll just say from the Met Council perspective, we have an energy manager for our environmental services division. Just got onboarded in the last couple of weeks, and getting that person, having the state Office of Enterprise Sustainability say like, hey, get energy managers on board with this job it is to do this. It was very influential. That's number one. And then number two, I'm wondering on the state procurement contract review. First of all, you're not the only one who gets excited about procurement. I love that stuff. It's so important. And I'm wondering if there's an example that comes to mind where the state was going to procure something in 6 months, 7 months, and then you took a look at it and you're like, hey, could you do something different? Anything to really rise to the top there?
Yeah, one of the first ones we tackled on this new paradigm was aluminum signposts. And so we consulted a lot with the folks at MnDOT who purchase and are the subject matter experts on that contract. And the question was like, what is the recycled content material of those posts already? Could it be increased? And so that is like, that one was one of the first ones that went through this review. And I think, I don't know what the number is, we shouldn't quote me, but I want to say it's something like 30%. So, great, yeah.
And then a couple questions online. I think first is Commissioner Stroman. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Daubenberger. And I don't have a question, but I do just want to make a comment and sort of add to the kudos for Marcus and the team, because I'm not sure like board members and members of the public who are listening fully appreciate the vast diversity of facilities that the state operates. And so when we're talking about water savings or energy savings or waste reduction, Marcus hit on a couple of them, like the 24-hour residential facilities, snow plows. You think of Met Council and the unique facilities they operate. You think of, the enforcement fleets that we and DPS and others operate. You think of fish hatcheries that we operate and the water use needs that go along with those, state parks, which are like little mini cities everywhere, and access to waste disposal facilities. And what I really love about this system is it creates a single way that we have uniform goals and common goals and can track, but that also really embraces the diversity of all of those facilities that we operate. And so I think to the points that have been made, every entity in the state can contribute to it, but in a way that really recognizes the incredible diversity of assets. And I think to me, it could be daunting, and yet here we are pulling together and making it work and making really good progress. So I just wanted to add that because I think it really does help provide some context to the results that we have as a state. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroman.
That sounds like a great ending note.
There's another hand up by Myra Kunis. Go ahead, Myra.
Yeah, thanks so much. I want to also just share kudos. And it's wonderful that we're actually coming together as states. Just like Commissioner Stroman said, the diversity of the facilities that we're working in and getting those tools in the hands of all of our employees is critical. And I want to applaud your team. I also want to give kudos to that green lab, being part of that a couple of years ago and really pushing for that. There's a lot of waste going on in those facilities, not due to any individuals, but they're an energy suck for sure. And really appreciate that there's a mechanism to come together in that space. Even the green composting that is finally available on the Capitol complex is really wonderful. And then getting that in hands of everyone across the enterprise is wonderful. So a lot of kudos to you, your teams, and all the partners within all of our agencies. Thanks.
Thank you, Myra. I don't think I'm seeing any other hands online. Others in the room? Well, thank you, board members, for your questions and comments. And again, thank you, Marcus, for your presentation today and all the work over the last year and your leadership. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move on to the next agenda item, our larger agenda item for this month, and that is to start getting some foundational information on data centers. And there is a lot to cover, of course. So today we're going to focus on an overview, energy and environmental review. And then next month, we're going to cover the water issues. So a lot of state agencies are involved in this work, and we have multiple presenters today. I'm just going to go through the list of all the presenters to start out with. So first of all, we have Catherine Nuschler and Sarah Lerall from the EQB, and then Chet Bowden from the Department of Employment and Economic Development, or DEED. He's our Minnesota Business First Stop lead. And then Mike Bull from the Public Utilities Commission. And then Dr. Sydney Lieb from the Department of Commerce. And Dick Cordes from the Pollution and Control Agency. So welcome to all of you. And thanks so much for taking the time to help us get up to speed on these facilities and all the questions about them so that we can build an understanding for future consideration of potential EQB work in this space. And my understanding is Executive Director Nuschler is going to frame up the issue for us, including EQB's role. And then we'll hear a little bit from Chet Bowden from DEED's Business Development Group, and Sarah Lerall will give us some info on environmental review. And then when Sarah's done, we're going to take a break and then continue on with the initial presenters. So we will have a little break worked into this process of information gathering. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let's see, turn it over to you, Catherine.
All right. Well, thank you, Chair. As you said, I'm just going to frame up a little bit of the issue. Of course, as you all probably know, the data centers are those facilities that house the IT infrastructure used to deliver and operate and deliver computing applications. And we have had data centers in Minnesota for many years. Many of them at smaller scales that you might have heard referred to as enterprise, like for a specific business, or co-located, which is smaller retail or wholesale. And those are generally what we've seen in Minnesota, is my understanding. But with more cloud computing and including the advent of artificial intelligence, there are larger, or what's sometimes called hyperscale data centers being proposed and built around the country by large technology providers. So there's growing interest by data center developers in Minnesota, and it really represents a potential economic opportunity for local communities. But in addition, residents are really interested in understanding the potential effects of data centers on the environment, including the energy generation and use, the water use, the noise, the land use change, and all those kinds of issues. So why EQB? Why now? Why are we hearing about this? I think what I just covered is kind of the why now. There's increasing interest at a bigger scale. But really, this issue about data centers really falls under two of our strategic outcomes. So maintaining and improving the state's environmental review program and supporting the state's program development on emerging environmental issues. The construction and operation of some of these really large data centers has the potential to require environmental review and certificates, permits, or authorizations from multiple state agencies. These data centers are pretty new to us in Minnesota, and they're likely to have really unique combinations of buildings and equipment on site that are managed through different review and different regulatory programs. And so effectively and efficiently regulating them is going to require cross-agency collaboration, which is already underway. And many of us who are dealing with these are talking and sending emails back and forth and listening and learning from each other. And I think what we have, what we really heard sort of generally at a big picture is that project proposers, for us, really most relevant for our role, project proposers have expressed some confusion about the applicability and the implementation of environmental review. And the public and public interest groups have expressed concerns, and including through the lawsuits that we heard a little bit about last month, that the potential environmental effects of data centers are not being adequately reviewed or disclosed under environmental review. And so starting today, we are bringing you some folks to help gather information about data centers, the environmental concerns, and also some of the changes that have been made in recent legislation. So we're going to talk about energy and air and environmental review today. There's a big water conference that's going on today. So we're going to talk about water next month when all the water experts can join us and they aren't all learning about things at the Water Resources Conference. So really within our scope, I think, is the administration of the environmental review program, our technical assistance, our program procedures, our guidance, and oversight of the rules. And of course, a reminder that environmental review is a delegated program. So the responsible governmental units make the decisions, and we don't have the authority to oversee those specific decisions. So that's, I think, one thing very clearly in our purview, though, is the big picture programmatic piece of environmental review. As I said, there is already some state collaboration going on. So the staff are talking to each other and kind of starting to think about what kind of information or guidance or tools might be needed to help to continue to support environmental review for these data centers. And we'll see what else we want to do based on the information that you all hear and gathered and what we all learned from these conversations and agree and talk about what we want to move forward. So the bunch of agencies here, that's kind of the framing our role, and I'm going to pass it on to Chet, who in addition, in his role at First Up is leading a data center coordination team that's designed to provide a single point of contact. And I won't say more because I'm sure he's going to tell us all about it. So, and Chet is online. So somewhere on one of these screens, he's on two of the screens. So, and we've got slides. All right, Chet, I'll hand it over.
Thank you, Director Nussler, and good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners, and board members. Thanks for the opportunity to join you today. I thought it'd be good to talk a little bit about our business development team and our mission at DEED and our role. You can see our mission on the screen here, and just to build on that a little bit, we have team members throughout the state who live and work in the regions that we serve. We are connected with the communities and economies there, know them intimately, work with partners within cities and communities that are looking for opportunities for growth, for investment. And we play a role in that, as these opportunities come up, we are helping the communities and the project proposers understand the different incentives available to them at the state, the data center tax credit being one, but several others that actually work with our local partners who both need to approve of those incentives, in their communities, and then in some cases even help facilitate some of the financials behind them. So we're connected throughout the state that way. Go ahead and go next slide, please. This gives kind of a breakdown of the different ways we support project development in Minnesota. We help identify sites throughout the state that may be suitable, different projects depending on the needs. We work with project proposers on their due diligence questions, bring together local stakeholders and partners to help them answer those questions, Permitting navigation, Director Nuschler mentioned, and I believe Chair Domberg also mentioned Minnesota Business First Stop. So that's an interagency group that I also coordinate. Incentives, I mentioned those. And then workforce. A big part of what we do at DEED is prepare people to engage in the workforce. And on the other side, as employers are establishing here or expanding, we want to make sure they have the support to hire folks and meet their workforce goals. And so we're supporting both the job seeker and the employer in that way. Go ahead with the next slide. In 2023 and 2024, we completed a target industry analysis. This was data driven that we did internally, identifying some target industries in Minnesota that make sense with our very diverse economy here. I wouldn't say data centers fit squarely into any of these, although you could see that there are related industries to that, particularly in the tech and innovation sector. But really what the report focused on there was, the need for more security, IT security support for business development. And you can see some of the other kind of sub industries that are listed. Great, and then moving on to the tax data center tax exemption. At DEED, our Office of Business Finance tracks the exemption. We often get inquiries from potential project proposers early on to learn more about what are the requirements for this. And then ultimately, if a project does proceed and meets those requirements, they follow up with the Department of Revenue to receive that tax credit. So we have some different levels. The original sort of tax credit was for data centers that were at least 25,000 square feet, invested at least 30 million within 4 years. There are some other kind of qualifying factors there. The same general principles apply to refurbished data centers. And so if the building is being repurposed in a way, or we need new equipment to make it work for today's needs. There are slightly different requirements for those. Also 25,000 square feet invested. It's anticipated that it would be a quicker turnaround because it's not a green space, it's a refurbished, so investing 50 million within 2 years. But also, again, some of the similar other qualifying characteristics. Go ahead with the next slide. Oh, large scale, here we go. So large scale, I know we'll talk about this more too when we get to the new legislation, but just to touch on it, how this has changed for larger hyperscale ones that, as Director Nuschler mentioned, we're seeing more interest these days in. The investment needs to be 250,000, and it could be at one or more buildings. They have 5 years to build, and then the data center tax credit is extended for 35 years, or beginning in, I think it's 2042. Again, we'll talk about that more when we get into the new legislation. At this point, we don't have any large-scale data centers that have qualified at this point. One, because it's relatively new legislation. Two, because they often take years to build. And the actual certification doesn't happen until that's complete, and we can ensure that all the specifications outlined in the requirements have been met. Okay, go ahead and show the next slide. Oh, here's about the length of the exemption. Originally for 20 years, it's now been expanded to 35 years, which from the date of their first qualifying purchase or by June 30th, 2042. So In other words, if their first qualifying purchase were to happen after June 30th, 2042, the actual start date would refer back to this day. Also, as Director Nuschler indicated, we have several certified data centers in Minnesota. Currently, there are 40. Most of these are headquarters locations or pole locations, both of which tend to be more modular or kind of one customer type situations. We have seen an uptick in inquiries related to the hyperscale. Even though that language is not used in the legislation, we call it large scale data centers. And our team, does respond to those inquiries, helps them understand the tax credit, tries to understand what the local partners are looking for, and work that way. But then finally here, we just provide a list. I know this is difficult for folks to read, but we just had a list here of current certified data centers in Minnesota. We'd like to see which ones have received that tax credit to date. Again, we don't have any that have received the large scale data center tax credit thus far. And I believe we'll talk more about Minnesota Business First Stop and that work towards the end of the presentation. So with that, I will pause and pass it back to Director Nuschler. Thank you.
Chet, just to clarify, that's a sales tax exemption, right? For purchasing things for those facilities, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's for the equipment within, right?
Now we're going to Sarah.
Tell you a clip for me. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks, Catherine. My name is Sarah Larrell, and I provide technical assistance to RTUs, members of the public, and others, almost anyone that calls the Environmental Quality Board as part of the Environmental Quality Board's environmental review team. So part of my job here today is to make sure that we're level setting, that we're all on the same page, both those of us in the room and online, in understanding how environmental review works in general. So I'm going to begin with a basic overview of the program itself, and then we're going to look specifically at alternative urban area-wide reviews and how those apply to data center development. So in general, EQB's environmental review program is granted authority under Minnesota Statute 116D and Minnesota Rules 4410. Environmental review informs permits and project decisions, but it is not an approval process. Instead, environmental review provides information that informs government decisions. Documents are created during a project's design phase, and they include multiple potential environmental impacts all in one piece. So documents include environmental concerns that go even beyond meeting permit requirements. The process itself and the documents associated provide information and opportunities for public participation in the environmental review process. Environmental review does place a moratorium on construction or governmental decisions until it is complete. There are 3 different types of environmental review under 4410. The first is the environmental assessment worksheet, the EAW. The form is provided by the Environmental Quality Board, and it has 22 questions about the project and its potential environmental effects. It's our most common type of review. 80% of all reviews are EAWs, and it's intended to be a relatively simple review. At the end of the process, the outcome is an EIS needs decision. Based on the EAW, if the project has the potential for significant environmental effects, an EIS is ordered. Our next type of environmental review is the environmental impact statement. It is more complex than an EAW, and it does require a scoping period. An EIS must review alternatives to a proposed project, also cumulative potential effects and mitigations. At the end of the EIS process, the outcome is an adequacy decision. It determines if the EIS is adequate or not. Our third type of review, the Alternative Urban Area-Wide Review, the AUAR, it's a mouthful. It has dual purpose. It's both a planning tool and environmental review, and it's based on a community's comprehensive plan. The AUAR covers a defined geographic area and is used in place of individual project level EAWs or EISs, but it is limited to only applicable types of projects. The AUAR is good, or it lasts for 5 years, and it can be updated. It can be updated sooner, but then is required to be updated every 5 years. So when do you have to complete environmental review? One of the core features of the rules are the mandatory categories. Environmental review is required when a project type is defined by a mandatory category and the extent of the project described meets or exceeds the defined threshold. So, for example, if you have a threshold for residential development, that mandatory category threshold is based on how many units of residential housing you have. If you have a non-metallic mineral mine, the mandatory category is based on how many acres are excavated for that mine. If you have a solid waste facility, the threshold is based on how many cubic yards of waste facility is going to be getting. There are mandatory category triggers for both EAWs. There's actually 37 of those, and EISs. There's 28 of those. There's also a discretionary review. Any government unit that has the authority to permit a project has the ability to order a review when the project may have the potential for significant environmental effects based on the nature and location of the project. You should also know that there are some exemptions set out in statutes, so some projects don't have to complete environmental review. Data centers as a project type are not defined in Minnesota Rules 4410, and they do not have a mandatory category threshold. Even though data center does not have a mandatory category or a definition, a data center may meet the threshold of existing mandatory categories. The most likely applicable categories under Minnesota Rule 4410 include electric generating facilities, air pollution, industrial, commercial, and institutional facilities. That threshold is based on gross square feet, water appropriation, and land use conversion. There are also some project location related thresholds that may come into play depending on where a data center might be located, such as proximity to public waters, public water wetlands, and wetlands. Those could also apply in these situations. Now we're going to dive into the AUAR. We're going to shift to the third type of review, the Alternative Urban Area-Wide Review. Data centers and activities indicative of a data center have been included in AUARs in Minnesota. The AUAR is used exclusively by responsible government units that are local government units. So we'll talk about responsible government units as RGUs from here on out. Again, it's used as a planning tool for future development as well as an environmental review tool. The AUAR can substitute for an EAW or an EIS in applicable situations as long as the projects are consistent with the development assumptions in the document and comply with the conditions of the mitigation plan that's set out in the document. The AUAR has advantages in that it occurs early in the development process and helps facilitate a more big picture approach. It's a way to efficiently pre-review development for a whole area at once. Rather than reviewing 15 different projects, one document could analyze expected environmental effects of allowed project types. It might offer advantages for communities, especially in understanding the potential cumulative environmental effects of development over time. An EQB work group developed the AUAR during a period of rapid expansion in the Twin Cities Metro. To give you a little bit of context, it was added to the rule in 1988, and it relies heavily on a community's comprehensive plan, provided that the community's comp plan meets the minimum specs and elements that are specified in the rule. The AUAR can act as a bridge from land designations and intensities in a comprehensive plan to the environmental effects of actual projects that might eventually develop there. So we got one more background slide on the AUAR. The AUAR is designed to look at the potential environmental effects from anticipated projects within a defined geographic area. The AUAR can include multiple scenarios for development, and the scenario is a little bit different term than normally in environmental review. A scenario is a hypothetical description of possible future development. RGUs can develop an environmental analysis of the scenario, and they can base it on the worst case, the worst thing that scenario could happen. Your scenario is based on worst case allowed by the comp plan land use designations. So, for example, if a plan calls for residential development, the RGU can create a scenario that assumes build out at the maximum unit density, as many houses as the comp plan allows in that area. And the mitigation plan that goes with that would also need to have mitigations provided at that level too. AUARs also allow for that development to occur over an extended period of time. Again, AUAR can substitute for an EAW or an EIS required for qualifying projects. Qualifying projects in the boundary would then be exempt from needing to complete individual or project level environmental review if they're properly evaluated in the AUAR and the project does not trigger one of the excluded mandatory categories. We will talk a little bit more about which of these categories are excluded in a further slide. Again, AUAR has to be updated every 5 years or earlier if the conditions that are laid out in the rule are met. Oh, just kidding. We have one more background slide about the AUAR. Just if you want to do the first, yeah. If we look really carefully at the rule itself and the changes that are made to it over time, it gives us a little bit more context. Minnesota Rule 4410-3610 allows a local unit of government to use this process to review anticipated residential, commercial, warehousing, and light industrial development and associated infrastructure in a particular geographic area in its jurisdiction. So we gave you a little bit of rule history before. Adding on to 1988, the development types of warehousing and light industrial development and associated infrastructure were later added to the rule in 1997 updates to make the rule reflect actual projects on the ground. RGUs were building in these project types of warehousing and light industrial, and so it was clarified in the rule to avoid confusion. Next, the rule was amended again in 2006 with a list of excluded mandatory categories, and that was added again to provide further clarity. The types of review could be honed a little bit more. So these excluded categories include electric generating facilities, air pollution, etc. In excluded categories, the AUAR can't provide environmental review. And then the last bullet, AUARs that contain a scenario, that hypothetical with a single project that meets an EIS threshold or takes up 50% or more of that geographic area are called large AUARs, and they have a slightly expanded process. This was added in 2006 and it provides additional scoping period at the start of the process. Now we finally get to the actual exclusions. Minnesota Rule 4410-3610 specifically excludes some project categories. The AUAR does not provide review for these categories because they have different types of environmental impact. The rule itself prohibits the use of the AUAR as an environmental review for project types that meet thresholds in 17 different categories that are listed. This includes some of the categories that individual data centers might trigger. So under the EAW mandatory categories, we have subpart 3, electric generating facilities, subpart 6, transmission lines, subpart 15, air pollution, and subpart 24, water appropriations. There are also 12 EIS categories that include subpart 3, electric generating facilities, and subpart 6, transmission lines that are excluded. In some instances, an AUAR may be applicable to an individual data center. However, in cases where a data center meets an excluded mandatory category threshold, the AUAR cannot provide environmental review at that project level. The mandatory category review will need to be done. So we've talked a lot about what we can't do with the AUAR, but we can do a lot with it. We spent a lot of time on what can't be covered, and we're going to look at what can be covered and what has been covered in the past. So again, the rule states that residential, commercial, warehousing, and light industrial uses can be covered in an AUAR through environmental review. The AUAR is alternative review for those project types and the infrastructure, including the roads and sewers and potentially communications and smaller energy distribution. Examples of individual project types the AUAR has reviewed in the past. For residential development, a lot of developments, including multi-phase developments over time. A commercial use might be a shopping mall or entertainment complexes. For warehousing, we've included grocery distribution centers. There have been big box store regional warehouses that have been included in AUARs. And light industrial uses might include a research lab, printing or document facilities. It excludes, there's no manufacturing in light industrial. And it could include a small data center. I did want to point out that the AUAR is a different type of environmental review, and it does have a few unique characteristics and procedural steps, different at least from the EAW and EIS. It is something of a blend of the two, and those unique characteristics and procedural steps include the content and format of the document itself. It's similar to that of the EAW, but it must provide for a level of analysis comparable to that of an EIS for direct, indirect, and cumulative potential effects. The document will specify the anticipated nature, location, and intensity of development. At least one of the scenarios must be consistent with the current adopted comprehensive plan. At least one of the scenarios must be consistent with any known development plans of property owners within the area. Large AUARs include an extra scoping period, that 30-day public comment period. The focus of that comment period is on the scenario development especially, but it can include any concerns that anyone wants to submit. From there, an AUAR draft is created. That draft, once issued, has a 30-day public comment period. And then this is where the AUAR process differs. When that document is revised, the revised AUAR then has a 10-day objection period, and that objection period is open only to state agencies and the Met Council. Regardless of whether the AUAR can substitute for environmental review of data centers, communities are including them in their planning. This map indicates coordinates as provided in the AUAR documents. It's not necessarily indicative of actual development, as again, the AUARs may include multiple scenarios. The slide indicates recent AUARs that have specifically named data centers or include hallmarks of data centers. And so what we looked for were inclusion of terms like technology park, the use of stand-in project names for projects, and then project proposers that are known in the data center industry. So of those, we have 10 large AUARs, 3 standard, 4 AUAR updates that have included data centers or potential data centers, and 1 data center was evaluated in Minnesota using an environmental assessment worksheet. Finally, it may be helpful to think of data centers through the lens of energy projects. Large and hyperscale data centers may be considered through that lens of energy projects. Facilities that require certificates of need, site or route permits from the PUC will likely follow their procedures. We'll hear more. Permitted projects will likely require environmental review under Minnesota statutes 216I, but we'll learn more about that as well. And that is what I have, Director Nussler, on data centers.
Thank you, Sarah.
Chair
Or, I mean, let's say you wanted to add anything.
Yeah.
No, I think that was good.
And I know our next thing is a 5-minute break, but before we go to that, just wanted to see, we're going to have a more robust time at the end after all the presenters to take questions, comments, thoughts. But prior to going on break, while things are fresh in your mind from the first 3 presenters, do board members have any clarifying questions at this point? Oh, there is a hand. Okay. That is, go ahead, whoever raised their hand online. Board Member Bauer Kemper.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thanks to Sarah and Chit and Catherine for the initial presentations here. I think I have a question for Sarah, or maybe two questions. One is, hypothetically speaking, what would the process look like for creation of a mandatory category and definition and associated thresholds pertaining to data centers?
I'll refer that to Director Nuschler.
Okay, thanks.
So the board does have the authority to create mandatory categories. It's been a while. I think there was a big mandatory category rulemaking in 2019 when a bunch were added. So it would be similar, but even a more longer process than we've been going through with the energy rules. So the board would have to authorize us to move forward with that, and we would go through the state's full rulemaking process. We would start with a request for comments. That goes out and people get to tell us what they think, and then we would draft a rule, and we'd have to, it also kind of similar to what Jesse's thinking about for the gas production. We'd have to think about, how do you define the project? What size of the project? What characteristics would be sort of commensurate with the idea of the potential for significant environmental effects? And then we would have to go through the whole state rulemaking process. And with those rulemaking processes, oftentimes state agencies will do advisory groups or things like that to get input. So normally I would say also that whole process would take probably about 2 years to get through a whole rulemaking process.
Okay. Thank you. And if there were such a mandatory category, or even if now a project were to fall into the industrial commercial thresholds of floor space, does the use of an AUAR still provide a pathway for potential projects not to? Does an AUAR, an existing AUAR, potentially provide a pathway through which potential projects would, even if they fall under a mandatory category, does the mandatory category ensure that projects would have to do an EAW or an EIS depending on how the category works? Or is the AUAR an alternative, a potential alternative to those things, even in the presence of a mandatory category?
The AUAR could be used as a pathway for review for applicable project types. So under those excluded categories, remember we said there were 17 under the EAW and I think 12 under the EIS. If a project triggers one of those excluded, they would not be able to use the AUAR. Okay. If the project only tripped those that are okay, the light industrial, all the other numbers, then the AUAR could provide a pathway forward.
Okay. So then taking the current state of affairs and the current rules and the material you've presented, Sarah, again, thank you for doing that. Where does all this intersect in the sense that what role, if any, does the EQB currently have in ensuring that RGUs are using AUARs appropriately?
Yes,
please. Madam Chair. And I think that, as Sarah noted, the AUAR is a tool that's available to local governments. And so then with the way the program, is delegated out to those local governments, right? They make the decisions about what things fall in, is this a commercial, industrial, warehousing project? Like those are all their decisions. I think, the role that we would play would be advice, guidance. Sarah's already been working on sort of just making sure that our underlying guidance for AUARs is clear and that we're getting that clear information out to people for it as a tool generally. I think there might be one very specific role we might have if there's an objection filed to AUARs, which doesn't happen very often, but otherwise, right, it is, as with all of the decisions, they're delegated out to the RGUs and the appropriate review or pathway, if you disagree with the decisions, is the courts. AUARs go through the district courts, not the Court of Appeals. It's different, but it is still, that's still the pathway for challenging the specific decisions in a specific AUAR.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that question, Board Member Bauer-Kemper. And Sarah, you might have answered this as part of Board Member Bauer-Kemper's question, but one thing I was wondering about is if an AUAR is planned, but there is potentially a mandatory category, and this is from an agency who does EIS's EAWs, EA is the federal document, but would it be a thing for a project proposer or city to do an AUAR, but then also have an EAW as a part of that to address the mandatory category?
The AUAR process historically has a couple of ways that you can exclude projects at the beginning. And so it was anticipated that there may be projects that you would like to use AUA, an EAW or an EIS in. So that is allowable.
Okay, so it sounds like it's an AUAR, but it's excluding a couple projects that will then have a subsequent EAW or
Yeah, yep. You must do environmental review if it hits certain mandatory categories. And in RG, you may choose other under certain circumstances. And those are in rule. There are opportunities. So.
Other clarifying questions. Let's see. Why don't we go to Board Member Martin and then Stevens.
I'm just curious, this might be a too specific question that's better held till after another presenter, but just to sort of put it out there. So some data centers, it seems to me, could be a pretty big source of heat, right? Rejecting heat from all the cooling of all the equipment. So that could either be, an additional environmental impact if there's nothing to do with that heat, because there's not like a near enough industrial heat use or a district energy system or something, or it could be an environmental positive if there is, right? And that, so in the environmental review process, how would like a data center that's able to pair that and basically displace fossil fuel use currently being used for heat because it's now a source of heat, how could that sort of environmental benefit come into the process? Where would it come in?
Yeah, there's opportunities to write in your mitigation plan, which is part of an AUAR, and there are mitigations in the other types of environmental review as well. And there are places where you can write about that. There's also in the EAW itself, there's a place where you can address other potential environmental effects. So there are a couple of different places where that information could be included.
Okay. So the additional effect could be like sort of in an adjacent sector, almost like in like an environmental benefit that's.
Yeah, that can be called out. They could write about it. I mean, it's not a score, thing. It's an information gathering tool. So you could put that in several different places, I think.
Thank you for that question, Board Member Martin. And now go ahead, Stephen.
I wasn't sure if it's appropriate. It wasn't for Commissioner Peterson. But we have had the conversation, and just a little background. We've been fielding a number of questions related to a number of projects that we recognize we don't have a role in environmental review on these projects. But we do have a role in trying to provide information to rural communities and agricultural industries. One of the questions that I have with this is how would a community go about determining whether they want to do a discretionary EAW or EIS on a data center project, or deliberately use an AUAR for handling a data center project, which seems to be where a lot of communities are going, and that's where we've been getting a lot of information requests. There aren't always friendly information requests, but a lot of comments from rural citizens. So that just occurred to me to be, because a lot of rural citizens have been talking about the apparent, to them at least, lack of transparency in an AUAR. And that they believe things can get slid into an AUAR as a group of projects that sort of diminishes their apparent public's recognition and significance. And it's my understanding, at least, that while a local unit of government would be, as an RGU, would be the entity that proposes a discretionary EAW, they're influenced by their residents, essentially by the voters.
Yeah, let me see if I got the, well, do you want to take it, Catherine? Or in general, I would say that decision-making authority is delegated to the RGU. The rule has very specific instances where a discrepant or a discretionary review could be required. And I don't know that I could add anything on the transparency aspect of your question.
If you may, I think Steve, it would be up to the RGU, and I think any government that has a permitting authority could choose to order a discretionary review if a review is not completed. I haven't read the discretionary reviews in a while, but I mean, I think it would be an option at the discretion of the RGU.
Any clarifying questions? Others online or in the room?
I see Chet maybe wanted to jump in on
Oh,
one of.
Chet, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Dobbenberger. Say on moving back to a question I had at the end of my presentation, I just wanted to add to that a bit on the tax exemption piece. The tax exemption is specifically for computers and servers, software that relates to that. And then it may apply to some cooling and energy equipment, depending on the specifications. But one thing to note is that I believe I'm correct in saying that the recent legislation exempted electricity from the tax exemption. And we'll touch on that more, I believe, again after break. So I hope that's helpful to add that detail.
Thank you, Chet. Right. So with that, why don't we go ahead and take a 5-minute break? So no, that's not much time, but if you'd be back here by 2:30, that would be great. We'll resume this discussion with the additional presenters. from break.
Click and
We
see
have
that.
our
I
next
really appreciate
presenters
it.
teed up here, which is great. One note, though, we do see a lot of messages in the chat, and I know Director Nuschler talked about that at the beginning. Would you mind kind of repeating that for those who joined maybe after?
Sure. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate the engagement and the interest that everyone out there in the virtual world is showing with the questions. We do not keep the chat as part of the meeting records. If you've ever tried to do that, it's impossible. So if you do have a comment, please, when we get to the end of the agenda, we are running a little ahead of schedule, so I think we should have plenty of time. Please, at that point, raise your hand. If you have questions that you want us to answer, you can also raise your hand and you can put the question in your comment when you speak, and we can look. We probably won't answer in the moment, but we can look into those and have things and potentially bring them back next month. You can also feel free to email the staff at info.eqb@state.mn.us, and we can pull those questions and pull them together and come back as we continue to consider this issue. Someone also asked about the recording. We do post our meeting recordings on the board webpage afterwards. So if folks have to leave, it will be posted. So thank you again for the engagement. But if you want to make a comment, raise your hand when we get there and do it verbally so we can all hear you. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that reminder and more detail on that. Okay, yeah, so welcome back from break, everybody. And next, we're going to hear more on data centers. We're going to hear about energy use, energy permitting, air pollution. And then we're going to hear a bit about legislative changes made earlier this year, or 25 session. And we'll have the PUC and Commerce discussing data centers and review under PUC authority. And so I think we're going to start with Dr. Lee. Is that right?
Sure, I think so. Yes, I have no slides. So from the department's perspective, we're really trying to balance the important economic growth opportunity that data centers present in Minnesota with ensuring that we are managing risk to the existing rate base as we bring these onto the existing energy system. I think the data center industry poses potential risks to electric ratepayers and the environment that we want to see mitigated through protective policies. And some of the legislation that we passed in the previous session followed along in precedent that's been set in other similar states that are dealing with this challenging topic. The other states that looked at this last session were Indiana, Nevada, and Ohio. Public Utilities Commission is currently taking comments on a proposal from Xcel Energy where they've designed a rate for large customers, specifically data centers. And the department views the intention of this rate design being that we're ensuring that these customers are paying their incremental costs to the system and reducing risk to other ratepayers. If you're interested in that docket, it's 25-289. And comments were filed there on Monday this week. So you can see the perspective the department's taking as well as other stakeholders that are engaged, or you can get engaged yourself. And other utilities will file similar tariffs later this year or early in 2026. As far as how we're thinking about the data centers from a load growth perspective, we have a robust resource planning statute here in Minnesota. So we are making sure that at least for the companies that are required to file integrated resource plans, that we are thinking about and planning for that load carefully, ensuring that we're looking at how quickly that load is likely to come on the system, how it will be met with existing or new resources, and also how we're going to maintain compliance with the 0 by 40 trajectory as we're bringing these loads on. I do think it is challenging. These loads are coming on potentially coming on quickly. One of the big challenges I think we're having from a planning perspective is in how speculative these loads are. And so we're trying to balance the long-term planning with the rapid change in how quickly these loads are coming on and how easy it is to predict whether or not they're coming. And I think everything else I have to say probably relates to the new legislation and how the energy boundaries were laid out there. So I'll pass it off to the next presenter.
All right, Thank you, Dr. Leaf. So then next we'll go to Mike Bullard.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm thrilled beyond repair to be here. This is the first time in my 30-year career that I'm presenting to the Environmental Quality Board, so I can check that off my file.
Special welcome to you then.
Invitation. With me, so I feel like I should have brought cookies or cake or something. With me, I brought up Jenna Ness, who's our EQB tech rep, but also she's on our environmental review team, and she's going to take any hard questions that you might have that I shouldn't possibly try to answer about environmental review in particular. So, does this work, or should I just? Yep, hey, it does. So I wanted to start a little bit with some background about the Public Utilities Commission itself. It's a very strange agency relative to other agencies. I love it. This is my second tour of duty at the PUC. But I wanted to explain we're a little different than pretty much everything else in Minnesota. We're the state's oldest regulatory agency and Minnesota's sole example of an independent regulatory agency. The federal government has several, like the Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Like those federal entities, we are a creature of the legislature, not a member of the executive branch. And the legislature granted the commission with powers associated with all three branches of government. We're quasi-judicial when resolving disputes between parties. We're quasi-legislative when we're setting forward-looking rates or industry-wide policies as directed by the legislature, and administrative when we're enforcing our statutes, rules, or orders. The commission itself is a 5-member board appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate for staggered 6-year terms, and it must make all its decisions on a record that's developed in each individual docket and in a public meeting. So they aren't able to confer with one another as they come into the public meeting to make that decision in that docket. So it's quite nerve-wracking. Our mission is to improve the lives of all Minnesotans by ensuring safe, reliable, and sustainable utility services at just and reasonable rates. But with the commercial over with. Here's what I wanted to talk with you about is the commission's jurisdiction over data centers is anchored by two things: our authority over rates and resources by rate regulated utilities, and I'll explain that in a minute, and our authority over power plant approvals, regardless of who is proposing those power plants. On the first, the Minnesota legislature has tasked the commission with, among other things, setting rates and resources primarily for the investor-owned utilities, electric and natural gas utilities like Xcel Energy, Minnesota Power, CenterPoint, and others. We also set rates for rural electric cooperatives that have opted into rate regulation. The only co-op that has done that is Dakota Electric Cooperative. And collectively, we call these utilities the rate regulated utilities. So we will approve rates and resources for data centers served by rate regulated utilities. In addition, the commission has tasked the legislature has tasked the commission with approving the need for and citing permitting electric generation generally over 50 megawatts in capacity, regardless of whether that's proposed by a utility or some other entity. So that includes generation above this size for backup generation at data centers. And I can answer questions if you guys as we go, or I can just keep barreling through.
Just keep going through and I'll ask members to hold their questions till the end.
Great. Rates and resources. Historically, as the data centers that we've seen in the state are covered by tariffs filed and approved by the commission without much fanfare. As you heard, we have over 40 of those in the state. But hyperscale data centers, those with 100 megawatts in demand or above, will be treated differently after legislation we worked on and other parties last session, providing a framework for the commission to protect non-data center customers from costs driven by the need to serve demand of what the legislation calls very large customers. That's section 216B 1622. Data center, these hyperscalers are very large customers. Under that statute, the commission is required to determine the definition and appropriate characteristics of a very large customer class or subclass for each investor-owned utility providing electric service, and to do so by the end of next year, 2026. As Cindy, Dr. Lead mentioned, XL has already made their filing under that statute, and we expect Minnesota Power and Otter Tail to file first quarter of next year. Dakota Electric isn't covered by that statute, but they have filed a large customer tariff anyway, and that's under review at the commission. After we get those sort of framework tariffs approved, we'll review the specific tariff or agreement between the utility and the hyperscaler data centers individually to ensure each tariff or agreement between the IOU and the very large customer assigns all costs attributable to serving the very large customer to that customer class I mentioned, the very large customer class, and contains other protections necessary to protect non-data center customers from whatever may spill over to those non-data center customers. And we're also responsible for working to make sure that the electricity provided by the utility to that very large customer, that hyperscaler data center, meets the requirement of the carbon-free standard. Plant approvals. So the certificate of need statute, that's Minnesota statutes 216B, 243, requires anyone proposing an electric generation facility of certain types of resources above 50 megawatts of capacity to first obtain a certificate of need from the commission. This includes any data center proposing backup generation above that size, except that energy storage projects and solar and wind projects above 50 megawatts that are used for compliance by the utility serving that data center. If they use the solar wind storage for compliance with the carbon-free standard, they are exempt from certificate of need under the statute. For non-utility generation like that proposed as a backup generation at data centers, the key requirement in a certificate of need proceeding is an evaluation of possible alternatives to that proposed backup generation. This includes alternatives like the potential for increased energy efficiency, load management programs, distributed generations like energy storage, and generation fuels or technologies other than that was proposed by the data center applicant as backup generation. This alternative analysis is really important to the commission. It covers both costs and environmental impact of the proposed project compared to other reasonable alternatives for that generation, and it's critical to the commission decision about whether to issue a certificate of need and under what conditions they'll issue that certificate of need. In addition, there's a provision in the certificate of need statute that prohibits the commission from issuing a certificate of need for a facility that generates electric power by means of a non-renewable resource unless the applicant has shown that it has explored the use of renewable resources and demonstrated that the alternative that they've selected is less expensive, and that includes environmental costs, the projected cost of the impact from that operation of that backup generation, and the power that would be generated by a renewable resource. So that's certificate of need. And now backup generation for site permit and environmental review for a permit. 216I-05 requires any person proposing to construct a generation facility, again, above 50 megawatts or more, to obtain a site permit from the commission and may construct that facility only on the site permitted by the commission. Again, this includes any data center proposed backup generation above 50 megawatts. So to receive a site permit from the Commission, a power project must undergo environmental review under Chapter 216I. We heard that earlier, and our power plant siting rules, which are under Chapter 7850. This statute was created from previous statutes in the permit reform legislation that passed in 2024 to make the Commission's permitting process more efficient without harming environmental review or opportunities for public input. Under that statute 216I, certain generation facilities require an environmental assessment. These are projects between 50 and 80 megawatts, regardless of fuel source. Natural gas, solar, and wind projects above 50 megawatts, and energy storage projects above 10. So those projects get an environmental assessment. All other projects, these generation projects above 50 megawatts, receive a mandatory EIS. So maybe it'll help. I have a slide where I give you a few examples of how these statutes work together. So a data center with backup generation over 50 megawatts, fueled by diesel, if it's above 80 megawatts, requires a certificate of need, a site permit with a mandatory EIS. And these would be, these proceedings, the certificate of need and the site permit proceeding would go together concurrently to try to move through those expeditiously. If a project backup generation is fueled by natural gas, the statute requires a certificate of need with a site permit and an environmental assessment, also done concurrently. And thirdly, if a backup generation was to be fueled by wind, solar, and energy storage, requires a site permit with an environmental assessment, but no certificate of need if that wind, solar, energy storage is dedicated to compliance to the utilities carbon-free standard requirements. That was pretty quick. So I hope it was helpful. I hope it was worth the 30-year wait. But also we're happy to be here and we're happy to stand for any questions that you might have. I should say Jenna's happy to stand for any questions.
Great.
I think it just has 2 slides, so we can go ahead and.
Yeah,
You want me over there or here or?
preference should be.
Yeah, why don't you come?
We'll just leave you as a slide. Make room for Richard. I know.
Pro agency, thank you for joining us.
I'm Dick Cordes. I'm a supervisor in the air quality division of the MPCA. Data centers will need an air quality permit if their potential emissions exceed certain air pollution thresholds. Typically for data centers, we're looking at oxides of nitrogen or NOx from backup generators. Let me see. Let's see. Oh yeah. Okay. Forget where I am. So there's a prohibition on construction associated with air quality permits. You need to have an air quality permit before you can start construction. This is one of the key factors in air quality permitting because it's kind of the leverage that air quality permits have over people when they're constructing. And so there's certain activities that they're allowed to do, new facility would be allowed to do, but nothing of a physical, a permanent nature, I'm sorry. Let's see. The next slide has a summary of the data we have in our database, our permitting database on the air quality permitted facilities that we've identified as data centers. We have, I think, 17 data centers identified. 16 of them qualify for the permits that have the lowest level of review. That are called registration permits. They don't have a lot of detail in the permit. We have one that's that has a Part 70 permit, and has a lot of site-specific conditions that describe exactly what they have to do, whereas a registration permit would have primarily general conditions. I don't really have a lot of other information, but I'd be available for questions.
You, and were we gonna go back to Chet?
Yeah, I think Madam Chair, this was kind of our, if you have energy generating equipment, what might you be needing to do? And then we were gonna go back to Chet and Sydney to talk a little bit about the 2025 legislation unless.
Yeah, why don't I ask about clarifying questions
Okay.
on what we've heard so far at this point for our presenters? Oh, I think I see a hand up, but I can't tell. It is.
We were gonna ask Kayla to call on board members, identify for us if there are board members with hands up there.
No
Kayla?
board members with hands. Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, well then why don't we go ahead and move back on to. Thank you,
Thank you.
presenters.
Great. I'm going to note that there's a whole bunch of stuff about water in the legislation that I'm not going to cover because I don't know about water and the people who know about water aren't here. So I'm just going to give a high level summary of the bill. It's a pretty sprawling data center package that came together at the end of session last year. There are requirements related to permitting for the data center. And that includes that there is there's the AUAR piece, there's the sort of CN light, as we named it at the department, meaning that the backup generation does not need a full CN, but it does need an alternatives analysis. There's a requirement to meet with DEED at the business first stop office. There are, as I mentioned, there's a large number of permit conditions related to large water appropriations. And I think probably the folks that do water will cover that better at the next meeting. There's a requirement for these interconnection agreements for these large loads, some of which Excels is already moving through the Public Utilities Commission because it actually happened before the legislation passed it as a condition of their integrated resource plan to develop these large load rate classes and tariffs, which are basically rules around if you're bringing one of these customers on and they have incremental costs on the system, how do those get paid for? There's also questions about stranded asset risk if the data center doesn't exist for the full life of the asset. Data centers have only been around now for 10 or 15 years. So if we're looking at a generating asset that has a life of 50 years, we want to make sure that we have correct contract provisions in place so that if the data center decides to close or move or their energy use changes dramatically, if that resource is no longer needed, it needs to be paid off by the right party and not leave other ratepayers at risk. There are requirements around labor requirements, making sure that there's unionized labor and prevailing wages are paid. And then there's requirements around meeting 0 by 40 and having a plan for that load increase and making sure that you're bringing on enough renewable resources. One of the other pieces that's in the bill is a weatherization program, which will be paid into by the data centers. And part of this is that typically these large loads are exempted conservation improvement programs, where we typically would fund things like weatherization and energy efficiency. And presumably these data centers would have received an exemption from that program. Large industrial loads usually do. So instead of coming for that exemption, they agreed to pay into an account for low-income weatherization, which will be administered by the department. And then there's some requirements around energy efficiency and building standards for the data centers. That's the full package of things that passed in the last legislative session. I can take questions about anything except water.
Yeah, why don't we go to Chet Bowden now for the coordination part, and then we'll go to questions after that, if you could. Whenever you're ready, Chet.
Hey, thanks, Chair. I think there were a couple more slides that come back up here. There we go. Dr. Lee referred to Minnesota Business First Stop. We are within the business development team at DEED, but function as an interagency group across 9 state agencies. So go ahead to the next slide, and we'll have a little more detail there. So I know that this might be the first time several folks have heard of Minnesota Business First Stop as it came up for the data center. In the data center bill. However, Minnesota Business First Stop was codified originally in 2012. And see a little bit of the language there to go see the full statute listed the number above. But below here are the agencies that are included. So as you can see, many are also represented on the Environmental Quality Board. So Department of Ag, Commerce, Natural Resources, Transportation, MPCA. Also, there are Revenue, Labor and Industry, and Iron Range Resource and Rehab. I think it's really important to note that Minnesota Business First Stop itself has no permitting or regulatory authority, and that has not changed with the recent legislation. We are, in effect, a facilitation organization. We facilitate conversations that are happening when we first get inquiries from project proposers about potential industrial projects, commercial projects, all the types that our business development team are working with. And then if there are regulatory concerns, this kind of offers a channel for us to reach out, make sure first that we understand different permitting requirements, environmental review requirements, and then correctly convey that to the project proposers. Go ahead and hit next slide. And I will say I took over coordination of Minnesota Business First Stop 3 years ago. And in that time, we've seen projects that have the complexity has increased substantially. And with that, we've had to meet more, understand kind of the intersection of different agencies and regulatory responsibilities. Also, make sure we are thinking through or having a good grasp of new state laws coming online, climate action framework, et cetera. Go ahead and hit next slide. But of course, that complexity leads to more regulatory impacts. I know Dr. Lieb also touched on a little bit of this. The data center bill covered especially the commerce side of things. I'll just note that for First Stop, we are also what's required is that specifically PCA, DNR, Department of Health, and Board of Water and Soil Resources, when they have a permit that request or inquiry at their agencies related to a data center, they are then required to make us aware of that so that we can continue kind of tracking that and being in part of those discussions with project proposers. And that's really helpful because often we are at the front end of those discussions. Prior to permit applications being submitted or environmental review starting, where project proposers have reached out to us and we're having discussions. And so as they actually move into the application stage, to be able for us to understand kind of where that's at and where it's going is very helpful for us in our follow-up conversation with those project proposers. Sometimes we can also play a role in clarifying questions if there is if a company or proposer is not sure what the regulatory partner is asking of them. Sometimes we can play a role in helping to clarify that. especially for companies maybe that have not done as much, done business in Minnesota before, and need to understand some of the nuance there. I won't speak for DNR. I'll just say that in the legislation, it does authorize them to conduct pre-application water evaluation. I know we're going to talk on that next, more next meeting. Defines large scale data centers for tax purposes. We went over that a little bit. Dr. Lee touched on the certification Department of Commerce has for those sustainable building certifications, and the fee associated with it. Okay, go ahead and hit next slide. Also mentioned earlier that we have started to convene a data center coordination team through First Stop. Given the legislative language, we thought this was a good step to make sure we're dedicating appropriate amount of attention to these projects. But really, it operates the same way we have as First Stop, generally speaking, in supporting projects. So try to provide regulatory clarity when we can, as a kind of a single point of contact for projects in early stage of their inquiries to Minnesota and development, developer education. We want to be able to inform them, on what permits or regulatory actions are required based on what we know about their project, where the project's at now, and what they're sharing with us. We also coordinate with EQB, to determine what type of ER is required. I think we'll continue to do that as this becomes more clear. These projects, come to us and say, here's kind of what we're thinking. Can you tell us about environmental review? And say EQB staff have been great partners in helping us convey that where we can. And then when opportunities exist, in this early stage, we try to facilitate conversations with project proposers and encourage alignment, with state laws, policies, goals, such as the carbon-free standard and the climate action framework, especially in that early design phase where a company or project might not know, what type of where they're going to land on some of those components. So, and then we support compliance. So as a project does move into permitting applications, this is where some of the new legislation comes in, making sure we're aware of all permit applications that have been submitted. And so that if there are questions from the project proposer that come up during that process, and they are looking for someone to help clarify what's being asked of them, or timelines, et cetera, they can turn to us and ask if we can help answer those questions. For this specific coordination team, we've got some agencies. All of them are currently part of the First Stop legislation minus EQB, which has a history of, like I said, working closely with First Stop in general. And so we're happy to be working closely with the staff over there as we try to answer questions on projects. I think that's all I had for slides. Was there one more? Nope, that's 38. Okay. So yeah, happy to help answer questions, Chair and Board.
Great, thank you, Chet. And I believe Director Nuschler had a little bit additional information on the last point about coordination.
Yeah, actually, thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to talk just really briefly about the legislation, and also thank you to everybody for being here. There was a lot going on last session with data centers, and I think you see in the overview really a lot of focus on coordination, water use, and energy use. There were some discussions, and in various drafts of the bill, as Sydney kind of mentioned, there were some considerations of things for environmental review, including the potential of requiring EISs for data centers. Ultimately, none of that passed, but there were significant discussions about that concept and what it would be like, what would happen. And also there were some discussions about AUAR. So some of those things did get some airing at session, as I think I shared a little bit as we were going through session, but didn't end up in the final bills that passed at the end of session. So interest in environmental review for sure, as well as the water and the electricity pieces, but nothing specifically changed for
Thank you. Well, and again, thank you to all the presenters today. So really great start to our on getting our knowledge and understanding up to speed on data centers. So we'll move on to then the discussion or any further questions for board members. So first we'll go to board members and we will have public comment. But board members, do you have any other questions or comments on what you've heard so far? I'd like to hear what might be of interest in learning more about data centers to you and for other board member discussions in the future too. What would you like to hear more about? So with that, go ahead and board member Nelson.
Madam Chair, I have a few questions that I might go through here. And it may have to suspend belief that I don't know anything about this topic, which shouldn't be very hard. So, because I don't. But maybe Mr. Bull or Jenna could enlighten me, give me a little context of what 50 megawatts is. What do?
You don't mind? We changed our camera setting because it was going many places.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Board Member Nelson. 50 megawatts is a significantly size generation facility, but a relatively small one. Like, for example, the Monticello nuclear facility is 600. So it gives you a sense of the scale. Well, there are a lot of wind projects. There's like natural gas peaker plants that could be about 50 or just above. So it's a significant size, but it's not huge. I don't know if any of that's helpful. Do you have another metric that you?
Yeah, I think maybe what you were trying to say was the footprint on land use is not necessarily always large, such as with a peaker plant, but a 50 megawatt wind farm would have a much larger land impact. But as far as the size.
It'll follow up then, you talk about the backup power for the data center. They like to have that in case the grid goes down, assuming that's what that is about. And for the carbon-free part, is it that generation is there all the time, but it's prevented from collapsing if the grid goes. And so they can contribute to that day to day. And if the grid goes down, it's dedicated to them.
Yeah. So the way we would talk about that is, Madam Chair, sorry, the backup generation at the data center would be a system resource most of the time. And that would be worked out how to compensate, who pays for that and such. That would have to be worked out in the agreement between the utility and the data center. And then if the backup generation was needed for some reason, then that data center would be what we call islanded from the system and it could run itself.
So Madam Chair, I think again, the public benefit then is that they're contributing day to day, but they have the backup still when they need it.
That's the idea.
Then I had a couple questions about AUARs and that whole issue. And maybe the staff or whoever.
That's not us.
You can come back in 30 years. You talked about, you gave some examples of how the predominance of AUARs are what's been selected for a lot of the data centers. Do we know why the RGUs are kind of going that route? We have some idea that
The AUAR does provide a level of flexibility in community planning so that if a project proposer has not committed to a project or a site, the AUAR does allow a community to prepare for that with associated infrastructure and some of the other environmental effects of the development. And that may be why, but I probably couldn't.
So flexibility, I can understand that. Thank you.
I could also add, and it kind of gets to the chair's earlier question too. I think it's important to remember that it is very early in this development scenarios. And I think that's when Sarah showed the map. She said, look, these are places where one of the development scenarios includes a thing that might be a data center. It doesn't mean that there's 100% been a decision that it's going to be a data center. And I think we have heard that there are times where developers still look like they're looking for who might want to come to this site. What kind of light industrial might be the best fit. And so I think we shouldn't assume that the AUAR absolutely 100% means that there's a data center. It's just a scenario that's a possibility. And I think that's one of the places of complexity is then how do you layer, okay, now there's a project that trips a mandatory category that we didn't know about when we did the AUAR. I think that's one of the questions that we're hearing frequently and are talking a little bit about amongst the agencies.
Madam Chair, kind of follow up, and that's my confusion was I couldn't see where a project proposer would want to go that route unless they just want the flexibility and think they're maybe getting an early start because of the possibility of later triggering a mandatory and having to repeat doing things, or in the context of doing environmental review for a larger footprint, they're paying for environmental review for way beyond what maybe their project is. So I was a little confused as to,
and it may
why do it go that route?
Yeah, it may be the community that's preparing, the AUAR, and the community by doing that potentially could provide a competitive advantage that they are planning ahead.
Have there been any cases where they've started down the AUAR route or gone that way and then later had to do another environmental review because they hit one of those mandatory triggers?
I believe we are about to find out in real time as things move forward.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam
Right.
Chair.
Thank you for those questions, Board Member Nelson. And then let's go next to Board Member Bakken.
Thank you, Chair Dobbenberger. I, like Board Member Nelson, don't know much about this at all and have, through the meeting, been texting our county administrator, and I guess I'm coming at this from a different angle. The location of data centers, it seems like things can function so remotely nowadays. Are these typically in urban areas, or will they show up in rural areas? And how do we need to prepare ourselves in the rural areas, if that's the case, for these coming in and familiarizing our RGUs with what's happening?
I think that the map shows that they tend to potentially cluster where those resources that they're going to need are available. And so where you have power and water and space and land is where we can anticipate those things.
That was bad timing. Let's see if I can get this out before they go crazy. That it's always nice when the Amazon guy shows up. So with your comment, the likelihood, or there is a fair likelihood, that the rural areas surrounding more urban areas would likely be a significant candidate for data centers. I guess I'm not singling them out particularly, but that is a possibility that we should, like I said, familiarize ourselves with those coming to town. we have a wind farm. I'm a participant in the one. So we have energy, we have water, we have space. Is that a fair assumption?
I think that what the map shows us is just what we know so far, and you can look at those communities that have potentially data centers going there, and yeah, match up if your community has those elements. Might be the best way to go.
And if I may, just a reminder that those might trigger different like review under more of the regular EAW procedures, because if there is no, the AUAR, there has to be a comprehensive plan. And so if it's not an area that's doing that kind of land use planning, which I think is more specific, it is called the urban area-wide review. It isn't limited to urban areas, but that would probably change the complexion of the question, is whether there's a comp plan or not. Whether there's an AUAR or a specific EAW. As Sarah's map showed, there has been one EAW that was about land conversion because there was a piece of land that was being changed. So depends.
Okay, well, thank you. That gives me at least some direction. So thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Bakken, for those questions. And then Board Member Bauer-Kemper, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm realizing that one of the questions I asked earlier, I stumbled around a bit, and with Board Member Nelson's line of questioning, I don't feel like I have, and maybe we have, an adequate understanding of the AUAR in relation to mandatory categories. So I'm wondering, maybe hypothetically, if an RGU prepares an AUAR, and then a subsequent project arises, and perhaps a project that the RGU feels is aligned with a scenario covered in that previous AUAR. But if a project arises that surpasses a mandatory category threshold, does the possibility that the RGU already sees this project as aligned with an AUAR scenario that they've already studied and found adequate, would the project still need an EAW or an EIS in accordance as called for by the mandatory category? Or does the AUAR process provide a pathway where that EIS or that EAW may not be required because of the AUAR having already been done?
Nope. If it hits the mandatory category of something that is excluded from the AUAR, then it will need to do the review that is required according to that mandatory category.
So are there things that are not are there mandatory categories that are not excluded from AUAR? And what happens in that scenario, that circumstance?
You're asking, are there categories of development that are what are the categories of development that are included in the AUAR?
Yeah, so like if an AUAR considers
all of that, all of commercial and residential, there are the ability for light industrial and warehousing by the rule are the four.
So if an AUAR contemplates a scenario regarding light industrial, for example, and the RGU finds the AUAR to be satisfactory, and then later a project arises that the RGU understands as light industrial, if it hits the floor space threshold in the mandatory category, will it then go through the EIS or the EAW process as required by the mandatory category, or has the AUAR already potentially satisfied that in the eyes of the RGU?
In that instance, because the commercial development is allowed under the AUAR, the floor space, then that if the AUAR covered that and has a mitigation plan, so it needs to have covered the use and it needs to have that mitigation plan, then that is an adequate, or that is a use of the AUAR for environmental review that works.
Okay, so that may be, Board Member Nelson, for example, that may be part of the why that relates to your question. I don't know if that pertains to your question, but that may be part of the why that the potential proposers are, working with RGUs to use the AUARs so that then they may not end up needing to do EAW or EIS in accordance with mandatory categories. So I'm not entirely sure if that's the case in any particular scenario, but in the abstract, it sounds plausible and connects back to maybe some of those questions. Thank you.
Can I actually ask Sarah, can I ask Sarah a question that I think, I'm going to make sure my understanding is right, and I think might help illuminate some of what Board Member Bauer-Kemper is asking. In general, like the commercial, the residential, commercial, light industrial, and warehousing that are allowed under an AUAR, if they have individual EAW triggers, those are also local government kind of like mandatory categories that local governments tend to be the RGU for.
That's accurate.
Okay.
There are very few
And
that are otherwise.
Yeah, and I think what we're wondering about and what we anticipate could happen is that they'll have been an AUAR and there will potentially be a project, like a data center could be a project that would trigger a mandatory category that's more industrial, where there's a state agency RGU. And that's kind of a combination of things that I can't believe hasn't happened before, but I don't think we have seen. And that's one of the things I think we want to look into. And so that's kind of, I don't know if that helps understanding that that if there could be a trigger of a category that's not included that is excluded from an AUAR, it's probably going to be a state agency category. That helps at all. I might have just muddied the waters. I'm not sure.
That's a fair point. Other questions by board members? Go ahead.
I have a follow-up for Board Member Nelson's question on the 50 megawatt backup generation. And Mike, just so you can get your steps in.
Feel free to stay up here.
So I might have had an incorrect assumption about this. I think I was thinking that like, if you've got 50 megawatts of backup generation, but you're only using it when the grid is down, the grid is up 99.5% or more of the time. So that's like very low hours in the year and therefore very low potential emissions. But if you're using that every day because you're going off during the peak generation times in order to like serve as a demand response, and you're just going on to your generation, your backup generation, that's a lot more use and hours and emissions. So is that, I guess, two questions, like, are you hearing that the majority of data centers are intending to use this backup generation as kind of an everyday resource? And number two, like, how would the environmental review process account for that, which is a very different strategy for how backup generation is used?
Madam Chair, Board Member Martin, I think I'll answer the second question first, in the sense that we've only seen one proposal of a data center with backup generation, and then it was withdrawn. So when you say what we've been hearing, we haven't actually seen not enough data to really answer the question. I think there's also, and the one that we had proposed to us that was later not moved forward was not grid connected, entirely backup generation for the data center at their use only. So that's another hypothetical altogether, rather than a grid connected. So one of the things, the way I answer it, and I probably turn to Jennifer if we need to get deeper into it, is that the operation, how a facility would be operated, the emissions from that facility, the water use from that facility, those things would have to be taken into account in environmental review, and would be taken into account also in the PCA's air permit review for that facility, if it was going to trigger air quality issues as well. Or if it was just a few hours in a year, maybe it wouldn't trigger a PCA permit. I'm looking at Jenna because she knows stuff and I don't.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance that can go into that. Definitely would be assessed to the extent feasible in the environmental assessment or impact statement to suss out all of those possibilities. It's not like if they were given a permit, they wouldn't be regulated and they could just run all the time if they'd like. And I can tell you from an energy generation perspective, what we've heard is diesel is considered more reliable, and thus why some of these bigger data centers want to rely on it. However, the one data center that did come before us in a certificate of need process was told in that proceeding that they do need a certificate of need. What does that mean? That means they need to show alternative options to diesel to the commission and indication that diesel is needed. And we don't know why they withdrew after that, but those are some things that came to my head with your question. I don't know if that's helpful.
I have two things to add on that one. On the diesel generators, which is the only backup one we've seen, my understanding, and somebody from FPCA can tell me I'm totally wrong, was that it was going to be difficult to permit those to run as anything more than backup, and even backup, there may have been issues because of the testing provisions. So I don't think, based on my understanding of the air permitting, that you could run those as anything more. I don't think you could run a diesel generator as anything more than backup. You couldn't run it as a peak shaving resource because you'd run into air permitting issues on that side. And then as far as what data centers want, I think, at least from the department's perspective, the data centers will be as flexible as you incent them to be. And the more flexible they are, their load will be as flexible as you incent it to be. And the way you incent them to be more flexible is going to be through rate design and through tariff design, and making sure that if they can come off at peak and avoid additional peak resource build out, then they'll do that. But they're going to do whatever they're incentivized to do.
So they can shift load off peak. They need to be actually doing that by shifting the computing tasks or whatever, not doing it by, or like if they think they're going to do that by shifting to their diesel generators, they would have had to permit them as such, and the permit would likely say, well, you can only emit this much per year. So they can't they'd have to
or moving to some sort of solar plus battery on site as well.
I see Dave came up. Did you want to add to that too?
Yes, just in terms of air permitting. So anything can theoretically be permitted in air quality. It's just the types of analysis we do to ensure that the air quality is protected. So in the case of, generally speaking, in the case of backup generators, they don't operate, there aren't as many of them, there aren't too many of them to cause problems at a normal facility. At a data center where you have hundreds of backup generators, it's problematic potentially even at the levels where you're using, where you're just doing maintenance and testing of backup generators, because aggregately it turns out to be you're operating quite a bit. And one of the activities we do to demonstrate that the air quality is being protected is dispersion modeling. And it's really difficult at this point. We don't really have a lot of good ways to do the dispersion modeling. There's a lot of discussion in the air quality community about what is the appropriate way to look at this stuff. For peak shaving, we do have ways to look at that. We haven't been asked to do it at a data center. But it just raises the bar a little bit for people to pass that model.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay. Any other board members have questions before we go to? Oh, we do. And I have to apologize. I have to step out for another meeting, and board member Martin said he'd go ahead and take over. So I'm going to pass this over to you, and I hope to be back. But we'll go to board members.
Excellent. So one thought, comment, and then a question for the various review components. So from what Sarah was referencing earlier with the AUAR process and looking at it as a community planning tool, it really is early in that process so that it gives these smaller communities opportunity to see what could be coming into some of their geographic footprints and then help inform that future planning process. So whether that's looking at a technology park, data center, or if it's residential, commercial, et cetera. So I think it has been a useful tool just from that perspective. And I find it a valuable tool as I also work with municipalities and other rural communities on some of these tools and efforts. So I know that there's going to be a lot more that comes once actual development plans get submitted for review and proposal through various regulatory requirements. So that's just a thought comment on that component of it being a valuable planning tool, very early stages of the process. And then from a question, so when you're looking at, say there are federal triggers, you know, lots of times federal agencies come in and there's a lead federal agency that would facilitate the review process. When we are looking at a potentially large hyperscale data center that could trigger water appropriations, it could trigger energy usage, it could trigger air quality, it could trigger all these other factors that would then have different RGUs technically by rule need an environmental review process. Is there some sort of way that there is a coordinated approach? And I know Chet was mentioning that through the first stop component, but I'm just curious from the coordinated effort and how that unfolds of what that would look like from the review process once plans are submitted and review moves forward from that perspective. So it's kind of multi-approach, and I know it depends. So that's always a good legal answer. However, just wanted to get any thoughts from you all.
They're all looking at me.
Everybody's like.
I mean, I think you put your finger on a really important question, and I think the agency is, and it's one of the things that we get to see as we have these tech reps from the different agencies, all of whom have a lot of expertise in environmental review, and we talk about things. I think there's a pretty well established process with an EIS for there to be, you know, whoever's if you have an EIS triggered on all these other, if there's any other EAW categories, this all gets subsumed into the EIS, and that agency does that, and there's a pretty well established collaborative process for that. I think it's less clear when there's a lot of EAWs, and I think that's when I mentioned at the beginning, lots of different things happening behind a fence line, and Chet's slide on regulatory complexity. I think it's something I wonder about, and as we come up with new ways to put things together, I think that is a question, and it's something that we're starting to think about, and I think that will be a space that we have to work in to try to figure out how that works and how we collaborate.
I would say that would be a really good discussion for this board too, because we have all the agency players that coordinate here and then inviting you back. So more than once in 30 years, I hope that would be a great topic, but it really interested too in PUC's environmental review process versus some of the 4410 rules process and what coordinated approach looks like from that too.
So Catherine's answer is better than mine, which would have been, we just make PCA do it.
Right. And I think, to Mike's point, the general sense is that there should be one RGU, right? There's someone who's on the hook for the materials.
With the understanding there's still permitting that has to come from multiple, however, the review itself. Okay, thanks.
Remember Kapfenberger.
Yeah, so this question is kind of difficult for us to get our head around this because a lot of it's hypothetical, right? These are things that may be coming into the state. We do see data centers going into other places in the country that are getting a lot of press because maybe one of them is off grid and they put it in an environmental justice community and it's all maybe not permitted the way we would permit it. And maybe there's pollution happening that we wouldn't allow in Minnesota. I think there's kind of two major corporation types would bring in data centers. One is these people that are kind of the anti-environmental folks that want to do everything as cheaply as possible and just let it go. And then there are the people that want to come in and have it be 100% clean energy, right? And so you've got these two kind of customer types. They haven't shown up yet, right? But we think they're out there and they're probably going to show up. And as we're thinking about this hypothetically, how do we think about those types of questions in terms of how do we give them 100% clean renewable energy to run their data center, because that will bring them in, or how do we make the process so it's not environmentally difficult for people to build data centers that aren't minded that way.
A great question. Are there any other questions? I think I just, not to be too flippant about it, I think that's the challenge. And a lot of it for the commission in our jurisdiction, which is primarily over, what utilities are either going to charge data centers for their rates and how that should be structured, as Dr. Lee was pointing out, or our approval over backup generation for those, which will have to be working with the utility in order to interconnect and such. So I think for us, we're looking to our utilities to be sending appropriate messages to their data center potential customers that we would like the good actors and not so much the other. But so I think it may not be a commission messaging. I think it would be, we're looking to have that pushed out by our utility friends.
And I'll add, I think from the department's perspective, because this is something we really struggled with on negotiations in the legislation last year, that we're the agency where we have the governor's agenda. So we were tasked with both the economic development opportunity from the data centers and maintaining compliance with the governor's really robust clean electricity agenda and how to thread the needle on those things. I think in having a lot of conversations with data center folks, the things that they're really starting to care about are ensuring that the generation is there for them to come on. I think a lot of them, where they started in the country was where there was excess generation, and now as we're starting to have less and less energy and capacity excess, they're looking for places where the energy is available. So that's a place where Minnesota, as a more progressive state, we have a really robust regulatory environment and a robust resource planning statute. So we're not just going to have the load come on and all of a sudden have to scramble to try to meet it. We're going to plan for that load and make sure that our resource additions are in line. And so I think that while it is more regulatory burden on both the utilities and potentially also the data centers, is also providing that risk mitigation that a lot of these customers need. So I don't think we need to think about the two things as necessarily juxtaposed. And the cheapest resource you can build is wind, solar, battery right now. It's not new fossil. You can keep old fossil on, maybe cheaper. But if we're building out new resources, the cheapest thing to bring on is going to be a clean resource.
And can I ask a quick follow-up, because that brought up something else? So then, is there coordination being done with MISO in terms of their modeling moving forward, what they think might be the new generation capacity?
There is robust coordination with MISO from both the PUC and the department. MISO is a complicated and sort of all over the place thing. But I think that, my team, we're actually building out an entirely new team here at the department that's just going to be focused on big infrastructure projects, advocacy about those at the PUC and also in the interregional transmission markets. And I think there it's really making sure that we're getting the transmission build out that we need to support this economic development, making sure we're getting correct and fair accreditation for battery resources to make sure that those are being incentivized and given the capacity credit that they deserve, and that medium and long duration storage are being treated differently than 4-hour batteries. I think there's a tremendous opportunity on the distribution system, and that's not being accredited properly in the big markets. I think there's sort of backward, very outdated thinking on the value and availability of demand response that needs to be treated differently in terms of energy and capacity crediting in MISO. So yes, we're doing a lot of advocacy, but if you think steering the utility at the state levels like steering a large boat, then it's going to be like steering the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
I know what happened there.
I got sorry.
Well, you know how good that is.
Yeah, like that.
Thank you, that was very helpful.
world right now.
Okay, so one more call for any other board member questions.
Vice Chair. Uh, um, Chair Martin. Great, Chair. I would just like to comment that the conversation we had here at the end really ties in, and maybe I asked the question of Sarah too early in the process, but remember Martin brought up what was at the core of the question that I asked is how can rural communities prepare for what they see, rightly or wrongly, as something coming down the road that's aimed at them. And a lot of these larger developments, and I don't want to aim it at things before the PUC too much, but a lot of large energy development projects occur in rural lands. And while we don't regulate and have limited power, we have a little bit of power at the PUC, but we field those questions because rural Minnesota looks at the Department of Ag as the first line of source of information about these things. And I personally am the one that gets to deal with these questions. So anyway, I just want to make clear that this conversation really clarified the question I asked, which was kind of clumsy and premature. So I appreciate the conversation that's gone on here. Sure, Commissioner Peterson would too.
Yeah, thank you for that. Any other board member questions? Okay, seeing none, we want to transition now for the opportunity for the public to make comments. We know there's a lot of interest in this issue. I want to call out the 3 comment letters were sent to the board members yesterday. Were sent to EQB and distributed to all of us board members. 2 requesting a general EIS and 1 asking EQB to provide guidance relating to AUARs on and data centers and to non-disclosure agreements. So those are in our packet. We'd like to ask the public commenters to be sure to focus on giving us input on issues related to the board's role and authorities. For example, about the overall process of environmental review under our rules as opposed to specific projects. If there's a specific programmatic issue you think the board should further explore or take action, please let us know. We're running a little bit short on time, so we're going to ask you to stick to 2 minutes per speaker. And if your comments include questions, we'll certainly capture those and the staff will get back to you and consider them for future meetings. So we'll transition to that now. If there are members of the public here in person, we'll call your name from the sign-up sheet and ask you to come up here to speak. And then if you're online, please use the raise hand function to indicate you'd like to make a comment or put a note in the chat about that. And Kayla will then be able to unmute you. So Kayla, I think first it's whether there's anyone in the room. Is that correct? Do you have anyone on the sign-up sheet?
Yes, Chair, we do. We have 2 commenters that filled out our public comment form. And so we can begin with Trish. Sia, if you're in the room, please provide your comment.
Good afternoon, Board Commissioners. Trish C. I'm a civil engineer with Kimley Horn, so a consultant in the space. I've been practicing engineering for almost 20 years and particularly on data centers for the last 13. So I've kind of seen the evolution of these facilities from small buildings to some of the hyperscale that we're seeing now. I'm only here to just offer help and assistance in the sense of there is so much false information in the world about data centers, and or the space is evolving so quickly that something that happened a few years ago or maybe used to be the case may no longer be the case. It's very confusing. It's very complex. It's a lot to wade through. So as far as, a resource that's a practitioner that's in the field that sees them not only in Minnesota, but across the country and especially across the Midwest. I'd be happy to be a resource to help you wade through what's real information, what's false information, some of the driving factors behind them. So that's honestly all I'm here to say. Thank you for all that you're doing. I like to say it's very complex. So, and how that weaves into, a complex regulatory, it's hard to decipher. So here to help.
Very much. You said one other here.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we also have Ashlyn Kenzier. Please feel free to provide comment.
Good afternoon, commissioners and members of the board. My name is Ashlyn Kenzior, and I'm a staff attorney at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. So as we know, data centers are really uniquely positioned to have statewide impacts. 10 of the proposed data centers in this state have the energy demand of every single home in Minnesota, and each of them individually can demand millions, hundreds of millions of gallons of water annually. And the RGU has to be able to address all of these statewide impacts in conducting its environmental review. The easiest way to do that would be to create a mandatory EIS category for data centers that designates a statewide agency as the RGU. And this would ensure that the cumulative potential impacts of data centers are taken into consideration, which is something that the individual cities right now simply don't have the capacity to do. Additionally, we would ask that EQB offer additional guidance on what RGUs must do to satisfy AUA requirements for large specific projects under subpart 5A. So AUARs generally must contain a level of analysis comparable to that of an EIS. And subpart 5A specifically sets additional requirements for large specific projects. And despite that clarity on the specificity of those projects, RGUs statewide are using AUARs under subpart 5A, failing to identify any project whatsoever, and in some cases failing to even identify the development as a data center. This practice undermines the plain text of the rules set forth by the Environmental Quality Board and the purpose of subpart 5A, because it is impossible for an RGU to study data center proposals with this level of analysis comparable to that of an EIS when the project itself is hidden. The Minnesotans deserve a robust environmental review process so that residents can understand the potential environmental impacts of data centers on their lives, their communities, and the state writ large. And a mandatory EIS category for data centers is the easiest way to achieve this. Thank you.
Just end there. Appreciate your suggestion. Any other people in the room, Kayla? Do you have anyone online?
Yes, Chair, we have 4 folks with their hands raised online, and we can begin with that you should be able to unmute to provide comment. If you are able to unmute, please do so now and provide comment. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, my apologies. Thank you, board, for taking the time. My name is Clarissa Eck. I am a resident of Solway Township, also located in Hermantown, Minnesota. We have a large scale data center that is in the works right now. I will try to limit this to 2 minutes. It's a lot of information, but I do want to thank the board who did complete a draft or a AUAR. It looks like September of 2025. The board did note, because it was not told that it was a data center, it was identified as in light industrial. The board did note that the development scenario would result in significant physical changes to property, 2.3 million cubic yards of excavation over 184 yards. My and my neighbor's property is within a quarter of a mile of this project. We were never notified. What is coming out now is that many of the governing bodies did sign non-disclosures agreements. It does appear these were signed as long ago as November of 2024. It is believed that it was very well known that this was going to be a data center. We're working on getting that information, and yet it was never put out there in the AUAR. In your board's comments, it specifically and repeatedly says that if this is a data center, that the AUAR is not comprehensive. We have designated trout streams. We have old forests, 120-year-old oak trees, wildlife, significant environmental impacts. And what is happening right now is the city of Hermantown is trying to push this very fast. I live a quarter of a mile, and I just found out because the Star Tribune did a FOIA request, and we finally found out it was a data center. It is up for now. They did, within, I think, 5 days of us learning, they did pass the final version of the AUAR. And then this Monday, they are passing as a second reading to rezone this property. Construction's already starting. We can see it from our backyard. I don't know how this is happening, and I don't know what to do to stop it from going forward. It should be an EIS, and this is all the scenarios that I think that people have given examples. This is an immediate scenario that I am seeing in a resident. So I don't know if that's just for your information, or if you can answer any questions. What can we do? It is the belief that they've always known this is a data center, and knew that when they went this AUAR route. And now because the AUAR was finalized, they are just pushing forward with rezoning and permitting. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. I think we need to try to fit in three more people in the next 6 minutes. So I think we'll go on to the next person. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So we have 4 more people with their hands raised to get through. We have next up Aubrey, and we will unmute you shortly. You're now ready to speak, Aubrey. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Aubrey Dirksen, and I'm a resident of Pine Island here in southeastern Minnesota. I do want to just provide again some more of that on the ground perspective to you all for what's happening to us residents. We're one of many small towns that's being targeted for these data center developments. For context here, the second largest proposal in the state's going in my neighborhood's backyard, 3 million square feet, twice the size of US Bank Stadium, and we don't even have 4,000 people in this small rural farm town. And the bulk of everything of our town, our schools, our senior center, the early learning site, our medical clinic, everything is within a mile of the proposed site. I'm concerned at how rapidly these data centers are popping up. They're going in really close to our homes. The earliest that we tend to find out about these things as a resident is when the AUAR is finalized and public commenting is closed. Most of us aren't even finding out until annexation or zoning has already happened and construction crews show up. I'm concerned about the lack of transparency in these developments. A lot of times they don't identify it as a data center. They just say that it's a technology center, and there's a complete disregard for any environmental impacts as well as the human impact to those living closest to it. What we're seeing, the standard scenario is local officials or developers sign NDAs, the hyperscale project proceeds quietly or in blatant secrecy under the disguise of these technology centers. When residents speak up, they're ignored. When there's concerns that an AUAR is inadequate, they're also ignored, and it's resulting in lawsuit after lawsuit. So I want to highlight the timing of these data center plans is happening when legislation is not in session. So the earliest that any additional guardrails at the state level could happen is February, which is going to be too late. While the guardrails enacted recently are a good start, they're grossly insufficient. I'd actually really like to see, as a resident, a moratorium placed on these hyperscale data center developments until we have these needed guardrails in place, not only at the local level, but the state level. Because in the absence of these strict state regulations, local governments don't know what they need to do, and they don't know that they need to treat these proposals differently than they would just a chicken coop. These are small rural farm towns like mine. They don't know how to handle this, and that it results in residents like me and communities like mine paying the cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Durkin.
All right, thank you, Chair. So next up, I have Nick Reinhardt. Nick, we will unmute you and you should be able to speak shortly. And looks like you're ready to go. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I just want to thank the board for their time today. I appreciate all the hard work you're doing, and you're reviewing all these environmental reviews. I am a Hermantown resident. I don't want to dive into that specific piece of it, but I am concerned about how these AUARs are being handled by these data centers. So the AUAR for Hermantown only proposed one scenario. That scenario being a data center. But in the AUAR, it was classified as light industrial. I think that's very confusing for the readers of these things because we don't know what the true project is. A $1.8 million square foot data center is quite a bit different from manufacturing or a light industrial facility such as a warehouse. The AUAR in this case was actually performed by the company doing it. Being public records requests from the city of Hermantown, they have no investment from the company that performed the AUAR in this. So besides not disclosing the project, not even being performed by the responsible government unit, it just lacks a lot of transparency to the people that are looking at these. And I definitely think it's inappropriate when you see AUARs with only one scenario is present on them. The idea of this it's supposed to be a planning tool, and I think it's really lacking that. Again, I appreciate your time today. I just really think these AUARs need to be really evaluated for data centers. It lacks a lot of transparency to the people of the towns. You know, we think we're looking at one thing, so we don't act on it. And then by the time we can act, these AUAs are already being approved by you and the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reinhardt.
All right, next up, we have Peg Fershon. Peg, you should be able to unmute right now. So go ahead and provide comment. Thank you.
Thank you for your meeting today. It's been really enlightening. I just wanted to make a comment about the AUARs. I think what we're hearing and consistent with what we're hearing is, while I think local decision-making is really important for our democracy, I also think that we have to be aware that the capacity from county to county and city to city to analyze some of these projects, especially projects like data centers that have these complex levels of energy and water needs, sometimes, and maybe more times than you would think, are beyond the capacity of the local government making the decision. You know, their expertise or their charge in their position is to fund their operations, and these data centers have lots of money, and they wave that money out in front of them and get them to sign the NDAs. And I think that's where part of our problems come in. The only other thing I'd like to just lift up, I know you said you didn't want to talk a lot about water today, and that's fine, but you did talk a lot about energy, and creating energy and generating energy also consumes a lot of water. So I would just flag that it's important when you're looking at the data center footprint for water that you also consider the water for the energy generation, because in many cases it's oftentimes more water use to generate the energy needed than it is to use the water for cooling for the data centers. Again, you know, this is such an important topic, and I've learned a lot today, but, you know, I do this. I've been following data centers for a long time, and I think, you know, it is very complex. So thank you for your time and attention today.
Thank you very much, Ms.
Chair, we have one more commenter with their hand raised, Katie Hawkins. You should now be able to unmute and provide comment.
Oh, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. I do want to thank the board so much for your time today. I think really my comments or my questions just want to kind of drive home a lot of the other points from citizens today. And then also just to kind of talk about the word community. I know someone used the word community earlier, that communities use AUAR as a tool to explore development opportunities out there. But what happens and what do we do if citizens, the broader public, are feeling that maybe city administration or elected officials, especially under NDAs, are using AUARs inappropriately against the public will or without consent, without community support? These very large projects, I mean, just like some people on the board said today, we don't have any of a hyperscale to really, know. And it really feels like the AUAR is being used by the city against the general public to not give a choice. And so I just really want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for the work that you do, everyone who's come here today. And just if there's any guidance that we can get or recommendation on where to go or general support from your board more towards the general public to help in this particular space, it would be greatly appreciated. We really feel in the dark and communities are very concerned about being targeted in this way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hawkins. Appreciate the perspective from all 7 of the public commenters. We're just a little over time, so I want to give back to the director to say one more thing before we adjourn.
Yeah, I just want to briefly thank everybody for being here and thank the public commenters and just folks, if you had something you wanted to say and you didn't get a chance to, you are always welcome to submit written comments. If you get them to us, I believe by like November 6th, we can include them in the packet when it goes out in November 7th. For our November meeting, and then as long as they come to us by noon the day before the board meeting, we will make like a second, as we did with the 3 we got today. So if folks have more things they want to share with the board, please feel free to write us comments to the info.eqb emails on our email or get us one of the staff. We will get it in the packet. And I look forward to talking about water next month, and we'll parse through some of these comments and also see board members if there's something you specifically heard that you would like the staff to be prepared to talk about. Let us know as well. We'll do some thinking about that ourselves too.
Great. Well, I thought that was an extremely informative meeting. I want to thank all the presenters again. Thank you to the board members and the public commenters. Is there any further business anyone needs to raise before we adjourn? Okay, hearing none, we're adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.